Right, so this is step 2, I guess, or video 2, or whatever you want to call it. If you missed the first video, the introduction to how we got this far, I'll pop the link at the bottom. But we're working through the HTTP API in WordPress. We're going to build a plugin that integrates with MailChimp, that gets a list of subscribers from MailChimp. And then the next step will be to add a subscriber. We probably won't get onto the adding of a subscriber in this video. We'll just focus on listing subscribers. So we want to output a list of subscribers from MailChimp. We want to render a subscribe form, submit the subscribe form data, post subscribe data to MailChimp, and then update the subscriber list. To begin with, we need to start with a list of subscribers. So we want to build a shortcode which renders a table to display the list of subscribers on a page. We're then going to get the list of subscribers from the MailChimp account that we set up in the previous video and display it on the list. Useful links will be adding a shortcode in WordPress, so take a read through the documentation there. And we'll be using a very simple HTML email format. There we go. To be able to build a subscriber list. So for now, what I'm going to just do is I'm going to exit out of the presentation mode and I'm going to grab this HTML and I'm going to start building my plugin. Now, if you have checked out the HTTP workshop code, which is available in the link from the previous video, you will have a bunch of things pre-installed, or sort of pre-included. This is purely because I use the WP CLI plugin scaffold command to create a new plugin. Don't worry too much about all these files. So now the main one we're going to be working in is this one, the HTTP workshop file. This is our main plugin file. If I load up my WordPress site and I go to the list of plugins, I should see the HTTP workshop listed here somewhere. There it is. I'm going to activate it quickly. And now whatever code we start typing will affect our WordPress site. I've already created a page, which I'm going to include the shortcode in once we've developed it. But for now, let's start building the shortcode. So as I said earlier, we're going to be using the WordPress add shortcode functionality. So it's always handy to have that document open. And it's basically add shortcode. We're going to give it a tag. We're going to give it a callback. Okay, so let's start with that. So first we're going to start with the tag. It's this type string. We're going to call it WCEU subscriber list for want of a better name. And then we need to supply a callback function, which is also a string. So we'll just go WCEU get, let's say, display subscriber list. So what this does is it tells us that we need to set up a function with that name, and that needs to return some content, this being a shortcode. So we're going to say subscriber list just to make sure that it all works. I like to just format my code. So there we go. So this should start working now. So if I pop in this subscriber list shortcode into my page, I should get something. So let's test that and see if that works. So there I've popped in a shortcode into my Gutenberg or into my block editor. I'm going to update the page. I'm going to view the page, and there is the word subscriber list, which is what I expected from the output code here. Then I've got all this HTML that I copied from my slides. Let's go back over here. So there's the HTML. This is what I wanted to have rendered. Now there's multiple ways that I can do this. I can put all of this into a string. I can then return the string. What I prefer to do is use output buffering. So for now, what I'm going to just do is open close tags. There's multiple ways to do this. This is not the right way or the wrong way. This is just one way of doing it. Then I use output buffering. So what this essentially does is instead of echoing all this HTML onto the screen, it just puts it into a buffer, which I can then capture using ob get clean, and then I can return the HTML. If you've never worked with shortcode functionality in WordPress, you can't just echo the content, you must return it for the shortcode to work properly. So there's my functionality there. So now if I refresh the page, I should see some HTML. And there we go, there's my subscriber list HTML ready to rock and roll. Okay, the next thing we said we wanted to do was we wanted to get the list of subscribers from the MailChimp account. Okay, so this is where going back to Postman or going back to the MailChimp API playground comes in handy, because now we need to start building this something else I was working on. So on the MailChimp one. Now we need to start building up this information using the WordPress HTTP API to get the data and represent the data in the plugin. So what I usually like to do in this instance, I'm going to be looping through something to output all the subscribers. So what I like to do at this point in time is just create a variable and call it subscriber list. And I'm going to call this WCU get subscriber list. Okay, so that's a function that I'm calling. I then need to define the function. And I need to return something. In this case, it's going to be an array, so I'm trying to return. I've got a codable thing coming up. I'm just going to return for now an empty array of no data. So that will give me a subscriber list. And then down here, I'm just going to loop through the subscriber list. A subscriber. There we go. So there I've created a loop. It's going to loop through all the subscribers, get something from the subscriber, and then for now we'll just no, that one. Echo the subscriber, whatever. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but this will give us some kind of idea where we're going. Okay, so I've got a for each loop. It's going to loop through some kind of array. Each array is going to have some kind of data. The data is going to echo, and I'll be good to go there. So I can test this by going, let's say we pop in a bunch of emails. So we say email@domain.com, and put another one, email1@domain.com, and let's put another one, email2@domain.com. So now I've got a list of emails. So this is actually subscriber email, so I'm going to change this slightly. I just like to make my variables a little bit more, what's the word? This should really be subscriber emails then. We're going to go that far. So now I'm only expecting emails. It'll loop through emails, get blah, blah, blah. So now I should see a list of email addresses in my page. Let's check that out. There we go. Okay, a little bit of an error there. Let's figure that one out. Because I concatenate it instead of using a comma. Okay, so there we're getting some data. So now all I need to do is I need to replace this array with a request to the MailChimp API. Okay, so the API request that I'll be, or at least the API function that I'll be using, the WordPress API function that I will be using is the WP remote get function. So the WordPress HTTP API can be used to communicate and interact with the other APIs like the MailChimp API, Twitter API, or the Google Maps API. If I want to get some data, I would typically use a GET request. If I want to post some data later on, I would typically send a POST request. I'm going to have my request parameters in an array somewhere if I need them, specifically if I'm posting. And then I'll probably use the WP remote retrieve body functionality to retrieve the request body. This one, that one, and this one are all functions in the WordPress documentation, so we can go and look for them. So let's go and have a look at WP remote get. And there we go. So retrieve a raw response from the HTTP request using the get method. So I can pass in a URL and I can pass in some arguments. If we have a look at my Postman, there is my URL. Okay, and there would be my parameters or my arguments. I've also got headers to worry about. So we need to think about how we're going to pass that through. There's no parameters for this get request, but there are headers. So let's just start with the URL itself. So going back to the documentation, I'm going to grab just an example. I don't have an example, so it's URL and array. So it's WP remote get URL and array. So let's create a new function and let's call it get MailChimp API list members. Okay, so I'm specifying that I'm going to do a remote get I'm going to get a list of members from MailChimp based on the URL, based on API keys and various other things. I'm then going to return it to the subscriber list, perhaps. I'm not sure, I haven't decided yet. And then we'll see what we go from there. So for now, all I need to do is I need to do this. WP remote get, and we're going to start with a URL. Okay, so that's my URL. And then I'm going to send something in the arguments. Now, I don't yet know what I need to send. Okay, I haven't quite figured it out yet. So for now, I'm just going to pass in an empty array. I could leave this as empty. It defaults to an empty array, but I like to just put the default in anyway. So for now, I'm just going to put in a default array. Now, this should give me something. Okay. The problem is I don't know what it's going to give me. I don't know how I'm going to get. I don't know what I'm going to get. I kind of have a good idea. If you've been following along, you probably figured out that it's probably going to give me that original response when I didn't have the authorization. But how do I check that? How do I debug this information? Well, in this instance, there are many ways to do it. You could install Xdebug. You could print R this response data here. What I like to do, I like to write a little debugging function. I have it in a gist online. I like to log the response somewhere in a text file. Okay, so we've built the form. Oh no, this is a subscribe form. So let's go back a step. So let's do some debugging. So here we go. It's useful when you're debugging API requests. It's useful. Sorry, when you're working with API requests, it's useful to have some form of debugging. You could use the debug log, and my speaker wrangler actually asked me about this at the workshop, and I forgot about it because I wasn't working through the slides. You could use something like Monologue or Logly, or you could roll your own. And I typically roll my own just because I find it easier to work with. I have a little gist set up on GitHub where I have this very simple custom error log function that I use every single time. So I'm going to copy that out. I'm going to pop that right at the top of my code over here. I'm going to take out this if define debug stuff just for the purpose of now. I'm going to take out the for theme stuff just for the purpose of now. And this is the function that I use. So basically what it does very quickly is it accepts a message and some form of data. It creates the log file path, checks if it's there. If it's not there, it creates it. So you'll see there'll be a log file, a log directory that gets created here just now. It then creates the log file with a certain format. If it's a file, it creates. If it's not a file, it creates it. Otherwise, it takes the data and the message that I've put it in, and it basically just outputs it to that file. So it's a very simple little function. I find it works pretty well for small things like this. So that's why one of the reasons why I keep doing it. So let us log this custom error log to the log file. So custom error log message will be API response, and the data will just be the response. No, that's wrong. Just the response. Okay, now those of you who are following along will see that this function gets called here, but then nothing further. This function doesn't get called anyway. So I'm just going to call this function at the top here, just so that it triggers this code, so that we can see what exactly is being returned into this response, because we're going to need to basically set up all these email addresses to return those eventually. Okay, so let's run this code. Nothing really will happen. We won't see anything happen, but we should be able to inspect the log and see what's going on. So let's take a look, and there we go. There's my log directory. It's just popped up right there. I open it up. There's the log of the format that I created, which is year, month, day, .log. Open it up, and here we go. And here is my API response. Now you will see it is an array. It has headers. It has various other things. It has the link that was requested. It has the body of the text. And here we go. Title, API key missing. And we expected that because we weren't sending through the API key. So how do we send the API key? Well, if we have a look at the way we set it up in headers. We set the authorization, API key, blah, blah, blah in the header. So how do we send the headers in PHP? Well, it goes into the arguments array that we had set up earlier. Okay, and the way we do that, I'm going to copy and paste this code out of my GitHub repository. If you take a look at the branch O2 populate subscriber list, you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm setting up a headers array. So my arguments array looks something like this. Okay, so I'm saying arguments is an open array. It has headers, and in the header I've got authorization, and I'm saying it's a basic authorization, and I'm base 64 encoding user : API key. Now this is slightly different to what we were doing here. Okay, we should be able to, and I'm going to try that now first, we should be able to say authorization, and we should also be able to say this over here. So we should be able to do that. Okay, so let's see if that works. Okay, we then need to take the arguments, pass them to the WP remote get request, which will make a call to this URL with the arguments, and then we should get some different API response over here. To make life easier, I'm going to delete the log file, so we have a fresh log file. We're going to refresh the page, and let's go back and refresh the page. Now let's see what we get in our log file. Okay, now we're getting something. Hey, look at that. We're getting a body with some members, with an email address, with jonathanbossinger@gmail.com. Okay, so we're getting the data that we saw in our original Postman request. Now, you could leave your authorization like this. Okay, I've done some reading on the matter, and I believe that base64 encoding it like this is the way to do it when you do the basic authorization here. Okay, basic auth or bearer token, one of the two. So it's a more secure way of sending your requests. So if you can do it this way. The only thing we need here is the API key. So for now, I'm just going to grab the API key out of my text file, and I'm going to pop it in there, right? So that should now also, I'm going to delete that out because it doesn't matter. Actually, it doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter for the workshop. If you want to know about that, ping me in the comments and I'll explain what that's about. But basically, in this manner, we're now encoding the API key so that if it's not over a secure connection, nobody will be able to sniff the key. This needs to go back up here. Well, that orange line doesn't. Come on, go away. There we go. That's it. Okay. So this should give us the same response. Let's check that. Delete that file. Run the refresh the page again, which is going to trigger all that code. Go back on the log, and there we go. The body has got the members. So we're getting more or less the same data. So now we need to take this information and we need to get the body somehow. And if you remember when we were looking at the slides earlier, I spoke about the WP remote retrieve body. So let's have a look at what that does in the framework of performing requests. So this retrieves only the body from the raw response, which is what we want. We only want the body. We don't need all this other extra information of the request. So let's do that. So let's say response equals retrieve body of the remote get request. Now this is one way you could do it. You could also do something like, which I prefer to do. I prefer to do something like this. And then I prefer to do something like that. And I prefer to do something like that. So that's the body of the response, which makes it cleaner, I believe, at least. So now we can say, right, I just want to see the API body. What's in the body? Okay. I find this to be a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to read. And I'm just going to format this. And PHP Storm is being painful today. Okay. So now we should get the API body in the log. So let's delete the log file again. I know I'm being a little bit ridiculous, but it's just easier to have a look at when I refresh the page. Let's refresh the page again. Where were we? There we go. Refresh it. Boom, boom, boom. That's all done. Let's see what's happening in the log. Yes, we've got a log file. What's in the body? And hey, we've got a body. Now, this body is not useful to us because it has members. It's in JSON format. It's not easy for our code to use and read, so we need to transform that JSON data. This is a JSON object. We need to transform that into something that we can work with. So here's what we can do is we can say JSON object. I think it's JSON decode. No, it's not. This is JSON decode. There's two. There's a WordPress version and a regular version. This is giving me an error. Let's see what this is. Yeah, we need to give it the body. And now you should see something that's a little bit better to read and work with. So let's take the object and exit it over here, and let's say this is the JSON object. JSON object, can't spell. Okay, and now we should get something different in that log. So let's do this one last time. Delete the log file, reverse page. Boom, 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 boom. And now if we have a look at the log, hey, what do you know? Here is an object, a JSON object. It has a members array, and each member is an object, and each member has an email address. So now we're starting to work with objects and arrays that PHP can handle. So now what I need to just do is take the members array from the object, loop through the array to get all the email addresses, and pass them back to my subscriber list. So over here, let's do that. So we're going to go members is the JSON object, members array, and I'm going to say for each members as member, I'm going to build up a little member list. And I'm going to just pop them in. I'm going to say members, new array, equals member, and I'm going to say something like email address. Now there are many other ways to do this. You can probably use array maps, and you can use all kinds of other things. I'm just keeping it as simple and as straightforward as I can. So theoretically what I should have now is I should be able to return this members array. And up here I should be able to return that function call. And that should give me a bunch of email addresses that output in my subscriber list. So let's see if that works. Okay, we're getting some errors. That's great. I love errors. Errors help me figure out what I'm doing. Cannot use object of type standard class as array in workshop line 72. Let's see what we went wrong there. 72 members, JSON object members. JSON object members. Oh, because I'm calling members like it's an array and it's not, it's an object. So I need object notation. There we go. Let's see if that fixes the problem. Oh, look at that. I'm redeclaring members. We can't do that. So let's call these subscribers. Okay. Right, that is members. Subscribers equals member. Return subscribers. Okay, that gives us a bit better code. This is freaking out because it's not lined up. Okay, let us try that. 75. Cannot use type class as array line 75. Why is that a problem? 75. Oh, because I'm doing the same thing here. So let's fix that. I'm trying to use array notation instead of object notation. Let's try it again. And there we go. We have a subscriber from the MailChimp account. So how do we know that's actually working? Well, let's have a look. Let's go into MailChimp and let's add a subscriber in MailChimp. And then I don't know who this lady is. This is my audience. It's going to ask me to log in. I want to log in with a new account that we created earlier. Let's go back to my audience. And let's add another contact manually to this audience. So let's say manage contacts. I should be able to add a contact. Oh, there we go. Add a subscriber. I'm going through this weird Beatles phase, so I'm going to say john@gmail.com, John Lennon, and we'll leave the rest as is. Yes, they give me a position. Don't know so much about that. I don't care about all of that. So john@gmail.com. Okay, well, let's just go John Lennon@gmail.com. Okay, didn't have a problem with that. Let's go back to the audience. Oh, it hasn't added it for some reason. Probably because it doesn't like the email address that I'm using. Okay, what we can do is we can go john@domain. I think this should work. Okay, john@domain.com was added. So if we look at our contacts, we now have 2 contacts. So now if I refresh this page, I expect to see 2 contacts. And hey, there we go. john@domain.com is there in my list. Right, so what have we done? We set up the headers, the authorization headers, in our arguments. We set a timeout. Okay, this could be any value. I usually work with 30. Then we made a remote GET request to the URL endpoint, and we specified the arguments. Okay, we then took the response. We just grabbed the body out of the response. We took that body, we decoded it from JSON to a JSON object. We then got the members from that JSON object, and then we set up the subscribers array based on the member email addresses. We passed that subscribers array back to our form, loop through the subscriber list, and echo the subscribers. Okay, now if you have a look at the code that I wrote for this, you'll see some things are different. I did things slightly differently, slightly cleaner, I think. I have things like the API key in constants. I am doing things like taking in fact, I'll pull this code over here quickly. So let's have a look. This is the same step, just in my initial setup. So I'm setting up the API list ID and the MailChimp key. There's the shortcode. I'm checking statuses and things, which is a very good thing to do. I am getting the subscribers. If I'm not getting, I'm taking the key and I'm getting the DC from the key to create the URL. So that it can be changed for if I change the API key or the list ID. I am checking if there are errors. So if there are errors, then I'm sending a response. If it's all good, then I'm creating the email addresses. So it's the code is slightly different. I would suggest you write your own code following what I was doing, and then have a look at the O2 populate subscriber list branch in the GitHub repo. But at least get yourself to a point where you can refresh the page. Let me get the page there quickly. Where were we? And get your list of subscribers. We're going to stop here for now. If you get stuck on this, if you need some help, then leave a comment on the YouTube thing. Ping me on Slack, on the Making Slack if you want to, or grab hold of me on Twitter, John_Bossinger. The next step we will do will be to start building the subscribe form. Okay, so that will be our next step, which will be a bunch of fun. So check that out in the next video.